Hello, this is a screencast that I'm going to go through how to implement this wireframe using HTML and CSS, obviously enough. Okay, so the first thing let's notice is that this simple lo-fi wireframe, we've got something called a wrapper, we've got a banner, a menu, main content, and the main content will obviously contain text, but it will contain something called photo box. The fact that that's listed twice gives us a clue that we'll probably implement that using a class. And then we've got a footer along the bottom. So to start with, let's just kind of write these things down in the editor. So first things first, I've got something that I'm going to call wrapper, and this is just purely for positional purposes. So I'm going to use a div and give it a class of wrapper. Okay, now inside there we've got something else. We've got a banner, and there's a semantic tag in HTML5 called header, so I'll use that. But I'm going to give it a class called banner because I might want a header somewhere else in the page in the future. Okay, the next thing is I've got a menu, so I've got my header, which I've given class banner. Then I've got a menu, so there's a built-in HTML5 element called nav, which I'll use for that. And then I've got what is going to be the main content, so again I'll use the built-in HTML5 element main for that. And then I've got a footer, once again built-in HTML5 element for that. So far so good. Wrapper around everything. So I've got this wrapper, and that encloses a header, a nav, main and footer. But inside main I'm going to have some text, but I'm also going to have these things that are going to contain a photo. There's actually a built-in HTML5 tag called figure, which is quite useful because it also allows us to have a caption inside it. So that's kind of a good semantic structure for something that will be an image with maybe some text underneath. And I'm going to have two of those, as a matter of fact, so I'll just duplicate that line. I just press Ctrl-D in my editor, which I'm using PHP Storm. Inside this header, I'm going to have a heading 1 and for the minute, because I can't think of anything else. Actually, I can think of something else. I'm going to call it holidays because I kind of really fancy being on one. Not as though it's not a pleasure actually doing this with you. And then the nav, it's a good idea to use a list of some description because semantically speaking, a menu is a list of links. And in actual fact, I've got a feeling I put something clever in my clipboard to do that a bit more quickly for me. So I've effectively got a list there. Actually, it's not done it at all cleverly for me, so let me undo that. I thought I was being clever by using Emmet, but I wasn't because I didn't know how to do it properly. So I'll have a menu 1 inside there, and I'm still not being clever because I need actually a link, don't I? That's the whole purpose of this. href equals, I'll just make it a self-referential. Oops, wrong key. Menu 1. Actually, what I should have done is just simply copy that several times, and then I could just change the numbers, just so we've got something to look at on the screen. If I knew I could count, I might be able to do a screencast about CSS, but counting is beyond me. Let's see what that looks like. I've put a little project here. I've called this menu float. I've created a subdirectory called images, and to save wasting your time, I've put a couple of images in there already. So I'll save that and I'll load it. I'll reload it in my browser. So that's what we've got so far. Let's put some content in here. So I'll put a couple of paragraphs. So I will use Emmet shortcuts for this. So I want a paragraph times 3, and I want it to be lorem. So if I hit enter, that's quickly giving me 3 of those, and then I'll do the same with this. I want a paragraph times 4 this time, and I want it to give me some lorem. Okay, and in my footer I'm just going to write a paragraph, and I'm going to write Rob Davis, my name. Okay, so reload the page and see what that looks like. So at the moment it doesn't look anything like our layout, so let's now start to mess around with some CSS and see what we can come up with. So I'm going to link to a style sheet, so let me first of all create the style sheet. So new style sheet, I'm going to call it float demo, and I'm going to link to it inside here. So I'm going to create a link. href is float demo. Its relation is that it's a style sheet, and its type is that it's text and CSS, and it's a non-container tag. So even though I'm doing HTML5, I'm still doing self-close because I like well-formed text. So save that, go into here, and let's start to do some stuff. Well, first of all, I'm going to do a definition for body, where I'm going to set the margin to be 0, the padding to be 0, and I'm going to set a font family. So font family, I'll have Arial if you've got it. If you've not, I'll use Helvetica, and if you've not got that, I'll have any sans serif font. Okay, let's save that. Let's just see if that kicks in. Yes, the font's changed. So I've got a class called wrapper. So let's do a definition for wrapper, which I'll fill out in a minute. I've got a nav, so I'll do a definition for that, which I'll fill out in a minute. What else? I've got name. I've got a footer, because these are all HTML tags, so I just use the word for those. And inside main, so I'll just go back up one just to put it next to it, I've got a figure. Okay, so what do I want with a wrapper? Well, it would be nice, because at the moment it looks a bit like that, to give it a width of actually, before I do any of that, I'm going to put borders around things, because that makes it a bit easier when you're developing to see what you're looking at. So I'm going to make it thin, solid and blue, just because it shows up easily. So I'm going to do that on everything. Okay, so I've got that's my banner, this is my nav, this here is main. These lines here are actually figure, but there's nothing inside the figure, so maybe I should just rectify that just so something shows up. So I'll put picture here, another picture here. I can't be bothered to correct the spelling. Okay, so that's what we've got so far. So let's now start to mess around with the CSS so we can see what's going on. So wrapper, I'm going to give it a width of say 80%. I'm using percentages on width measurements so that it's more liquid layout, so that as I resize the browser, the layout will change. So width of 80%, let's give me that, but I don't want 20% there, I want sort of 10% on either side. So you probably know this already, that I can say margin, and if I specify 4 measurements, they go like a clock, top, right, bottom, left. If I specify 2 measurements, then the first number I give is the top and the bottom, and the next number I give is the left and the right. So the top and the bottom, I'm just going to give as a measure 1 EM, so it's the letter M's width. And then the left and right I'm going to set to auto. So if I do that, it'll center that in the middle. And by the way, me defining that as one letter M's width has reminded me that in the body I should specify the font size. And by default, although it seemed weird to me when I first did it, I specify it as a percentage because that's cross-browser compatible, and 100% means it works out at about 16 pico points, which is approximately what we've got there. Okay, let's just pick away at this little by little. Let's do a picture there because it's dead straightforward to do that. So I'll go into here and I've got these images and I'll drag that image into, I think I can do this actually, I've not tried it in this editor and I probably can't since it doesn't seem to be working. Okay, so I'm in the figure, I'm going to say img source equals, and I want it to be holiday. Now alt text is people on a beach, and that's a self-close tag as well again, even though I don't need it. And I could include this tag called figure caption and say life is good, life is a beach. There we go. That's what that looks like. Oops, there it appears. Let's do the same on the other one to make life easier. I'll copy the entire thing and then just change it to holiday 2. Okay. So let's cope with these first of all. The images, look, the photo box thingy bobs should be on that side. Okay, so I forgot to give those a class, so let's do that. Figure class equals photo box. Class equals photo box, and I'll define photo boxes inside here. I tell you what, I'll only use photo box if it's attached to a figure, just to show you something else, because obviously I could write dot photo box, but if I wanted to make sure that photo box could only be attached to a figure, I could write figure dot photo box, and then this is a definition for that. So when it's a definition for that, let's make it float to one side. So float right, I think it appeared on our wireframe, it was over to the right. So float right will mean that those images float over to the right. Okay. Now it's automatically with this image set the width to be the width of the image there. Okay, I've got a slight problem here because one of the characteristics of a float is that it floats to left or right, and then the other content, the content that follows it, I must stress, moves up to occupy the space it's left, and this has also moved up with it, and I don't want that to happen. I want this to be over here somewhere. So there's a great property called clear, and you can tell it to clear left or right or both. And what that'll do is it'll move down the page until it can have a clear view, is the way I think of it, of the right margin, the left margin, or both margins. So I'm going to tell it that it should clear right, so that it will move down until it can see the right border. So that works there. And that actually shows us another weird thing about floats, which is that they're in the document flow, so things move to avoid them because they're in the flow, but they don't have a height with regard to their parents. I call this curtains because it reminds me a little bit of some curtains that hang below the window. So what we've got to do is wake up the parent element to this, which is main, to tell it that it's got some content inside it. And the simple property you use is overflow. So you can say overflow auto, and that should wake up main so that main realizes it's got some content, and if you saw it expanded down there. This main, the text is right up against the border, and the text is right up against the border there. So let's do something about that. So let's, where am I? Main. Let's give it some padding. If you remember, padding is the space inside the border, and margin is the space outside the border. So if I say padding, first of all I'll do 1 EM, so it's 1 EM all the way around. Okay. Usually what I find is that when I do 1 EM all the way around, it always seems bigger this way than it does this way. So I'm going to modify that and only make it half an EM at the top and 1 EM left and right. So it's, to remind you, it's the width of a letter M. It's an old printing term. So it looks a little bit more like that, and I've got some content with images, but this menu should float to one side. So let's do something with that. Notice that it's a block element, and all block elements by default are 100% wide, so you never need to say if you want something to be 100% wide, like the footer is 100% wide, the heading at the top, and this is 100% wide, so never say width is 100%. But what we could do with is making this be on the left. Well, let's try floating it, because that's what this is about. So let's do a definition for nav where we say float left. Okay, so that moved over to the left. Now, in actual fact, that slightly surprised me, because I expected it not to move to the left yet, because I didn't specify what the width of it should be. So I'm going to do that straight away as well. I'm going to say width is, let's make 20% and see what happens. Okay, so far so good. The advantage of that is as I move things, it resizes. Actually, it's an advantage to a certain extent, but often you don't want a menu to move about. Although I'm a great advocate of using percentage measurements on a menu, I think it looks nicer if it's a fixed width. So let me just try 200 pixels and see what that looks like. Yeah, that looks about the right size for a menu. We'll cope with the fact that this is a list and it's got these things in a minute, and the fact that I've got a double border around things and stuff like that. We'll cope with in a minute. So what do I think of that? Well, I think that's not too bad. So let's do a few other things. Right, if I am a nav inside which I'm an unordered list, which is what we've got here, we're a nav inside of which is an unordered list, so nav space UL. Let's take away those those little dots. So list style type, I want it to be none. So let's see the result of that. So far so good. Now on a list there's always padding or margin, and unfortunately I can never remember which it is, whether it's padding or margin. So let's try one first. Do you feel lucky? Padding. If it moves to the left, I was right. Whoa! Completely by fluke. So, except I don't want them quite over there like that. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the list items in, because it's the list items I want to be indented slightly. So now let's do another definition. If you're a nav, inside which you're an ordered list, and inside which you're a list item, then this definition is for you. And by the way, just let me show you this. I can right mouse click inside Chrome, and it works in other browsers as well. Choose inspect and choose that list item, and if I right mouse click on it, I can copy the selector. Let's see what that does. Paste it there. So that shows me in actual fact the a real selector if I want to get to, in this case, the first one, the nth child with a number 1 in it. But look, it shows me that there's a body inside which is a div, inside which is a nav, inside which is a ul, inside which is an li. By the way, this greater than symbol means the immediate descendant. So it only means the first level of li's in this case. If there were a ul and li inside that, that wouldn't count. That's a useful selector at times, and I'm sure we'll probably use it in a little while. So the li, I want to have some margin, but I want, at the minute, the margin I just want to be on the left. So I'm going to say nothing at the top, nothing at the right, nothing at the bottom, but on the left I want it to be 1 letter's width. So that's moved in a bit. Actually, I could do with a bit of space between them as well. So top, right, bottom, let's just give half of that at the bottom. So I'm underlining that as though I've made a mistake, but I don't think I have. No, it was just it. Okay, so that's working quite well. Let's now do a definition for those A's that are inside that. So if you're a nav, and I'm going to shorten this, because if you're an li inside a nav, inside which you're an A, then let's do this, that you are something. That's what I wanted to do. Text declaration none. So we get rid of the underlines. Let's do a similar definition. If you're a nav and you're an li inside which you're an A in a hover state, then let me think background color, just make it kind of mid-grey. So hover state is when the mouse is over the top. Now that doesn't look very good because the grey only covers the actual link, and the reason for that is because an A is an inline element, it's not a block element. If you think about it, if you put a link in some text, then that link, just extends that amount. It doesn't throw a new line and cause it to be in a block on its own line. So let's do something about that. Let's make the display to be block instead of its default of inline. And then what we'll find is when I hover over it, it occupies its full width. Not quite what I wanted because the li has got a margin there. Maybe I should have used something else. So let's modify that. I used margin for the li. Let's change that to padding and see what happens. Because padding is on the inside of the No, still didn't quite do what I want. Let me remove that altogether. And I think what I'm going to do is, let me just remove it altogether first of all, see what happens. Okay, now let me add some padding on this. So padding on the left. Let me make it 1M. And that gives me a bit more what I want. In other words, what I've just done is move the A over with padding, so that padding is on the inside of the border and inside of the block. So that looks a bit better, except I could do with not just padding the left, but I could do with padding the whole thing. And at top and bottom, I think I'll do with 1/4 of an EM, and left and right with 1 EM. That didn't seem to make any difference whatsoever. Oh, it did actually. It's widened it fractionally, hasn't it? Okay. Things are moving up and down slightly. Why is that? Have I just put it on the wrong thing? No. It's because I've made it a block only in the hover state, whereas in actual fact I should have made it a block even when it's not in the hover state. So it's a block normally, and then when we hover over it we change the background color. So I put that definition in the wrong place, which meant as I hovered over it, it changed to be a block. So now it's always a block and it doesn't jump about. Okay, so far so good. In fact, that kind of looks like what we want. I mean, there's still a bit of a way to go. I should indent this, and I should do a few other things with it. This text here in the footer, ideally I think I'd like that to be text align right, and maybe I'd like it text, no it's not text, it's font style italic. Could have done with some padding as well. Actually, let me use that definition. If you're a footer, and as your immediate parent, immediate child of that, you're anything whatsoever. In this case, if you remember, I put a paragraph inside my footer, but I might change that from a paragraph to something else. So this definition means the immediate child, so not something inside something else, but the immediate child. This is the definition. I want you to have some padding. I want the padding to be, what does it look like? I don't want any at the top, but I want it to be 2 EM left and right. So that moves in a bit. Okay, so what's happening now? Well, so far so good. I don't like the way those pictures behave, so I'm going to show you something else to do with the picture. So at the minute I've got it floating okay. Where did I specify what its width is? I didn't. I made it float, but I didn't specify a width because its width is auto, isn't it? So I'm going to specify a width, and I'm going to say the width is, what do you think that is? It's probably about 40% or something like that of its parent. Yeah, more or less. Got a bit of a border here, so it wasn't quite 40%. I think I might try and mess around with that. Let's do something else. So its width is 40%. So if you're a figure and you're a photo box inside which you're an image, let's make the image width to be 100% of its parent. Okay, so in other words, it'll completely fill its parent. That makes sense. So I made the parent, i.e. the figure with a class of photo box, 40% of its parent, which is main, and then I made the image inside of it to be 100% of that. So, and this has another nice side effect, because if that figure is 40%, notice what happens as it gets smaller. The image stays 100% of it, so the image shrinks with it, which is a kind of nice touch. What else can I show you? Well, normally you wouldn't have borders around everything, so let's remove some of these borders. It's nice to have a border around wrapper, so that one can stay. We don't want a border around the nav though, so I'm going to remove that one. Let's see what happens when I do that. Not quite what I wanted, because it would be nice to have a border at the top, wouldn't it? Or maybe what should happen is this banner thing. No, what was it called? What did I call it? A header. Maybe the header should have a border at its bottom part. So let's do that. Where am I? I didn't do a definition for header, so now's the time. If you're a header and you've got the class of banner, then what I want you to do is have a border thin, solid and blue. I only want it at the top, so let's say border top. No, at the bottom, progression. Okay, so this thing here has now got a border running along its bottom. This is main here, so let's take away its border. Where have I done a definition for main? Let's take away its border, except on the left. So let's give it a border on the left. So what will happen is it will keep this border here. So the advantage of putting a border on this is it makes it look as though this menu occupies this entire space, whereas we know that in fact the menu only comes to about there. But by putting the border on the left of the content, it always seems to fill the page. The footer is the same. We can see that we've got a double border here because I've still got a border around footer. Let's change border footer to bordered top. So now it's only got a border along its top. So there we go. That looks quite nice, other than the fact that I need to indent this and, you know, blah blah blah. Lots more things I could do. But more or less that looks like the layout that we'd got. Okie dokie. Hope that proved helpful. You can always scrub back through the video to pick up any bits that you missed. Okay, thanks very much indeed. Bye bye.